Hello and welcome to Insight. I'm Natasha Jhabhaskar. 3 suicide bombers opened fire, then blew themselves up in Istanbul's main international airport yesterday, killing 36 people and wounding close to 150 in what Turkey's Prime Minister said appeared to have been an attack by ISIS terrorists. The attack on Europe's third busiest airport is one of the deadliest in a series of suicide bombings in Turkey, which is struggling to contain the spillover from neighboring Syria's civil war and battling an insurgency by Kurdish militants in its southeast. The attack bore similarities to a suicide bombing by ISIS terrorists at Brussels airport in March, which killed 16 people. The United States said it stood in solidarity with Turkey, its NATO ally, and that such attacks would only reinforce their joint determination. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon stressed the need to intensify global efforts to combat extremism. So what are the challenges before Turkey post this grave attack? Take a quick look on this report.
A series of deadly explosions tore through crowds at Istanbul's Ataturk International Airport last evening, leaving at least 36 people dead and wounding close to 150 in what Turkey's Prime Minister said appeared to have been an attack by ISIS terrorists. Ataturk is Turkey's largest airport and a major transport hub for travelers from around the world. Turkey has suffered a spate of bombings this year, including 2 suicide attacks in tourist areas of Istanbul, blamed on ISIS, and 2 car bombings in the capital Ankara, which were claimed by a Kurdish militant group. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said that the attack should serve as a turning point in the global fight against militant groups. Turkey, which is part of the US-led coalition against Islamic State, is also fighting Kurdish militants in its largely Kurdish southeast. Bureau Report.
Right, and joining me for more on this very esteemed guest with me, former Ambassador Suresh Goyal. Thanks very much, sir, for joining us in this program. And Bureau Chief Sana, Dr. Awad. Thanks very much, Dr. Awad, for joining us in this program. I'll start the program with you, Dr. Awad. Why has security situation worsened in Turkey? We have seen so many series of attacks and bombings in the last few months. What's really going wrong there?
Well, this is the most unfortunate attack. In fact, it is a horrendous attack on the innocent people that have been targeted by a terrorist organization, sheltered, trained, armed by the Turkish government. Erdogan government is solely responsible for the mess they have created. You have remember, we have already talked long time ago about the danger of playing in the hand of the ideologists of radical elements and terrorist organization, where you allowed 950 kilometers open the border with Syria. You let all these terrorist organizations to get in, and they have come through and from Turkey went back to their country and create havoc on those countries. So the attack was imminent. We were anticipating that there will be more attack, and I think the security was in high alert, because if you see the footage that one of the security checkpoint that he was attacked, one of the person they tried to search him and he blew up himself, and that clear indication that the Turkish government fully aware that this is now the targeting the tourist industry inside Turkey at one side, and the second point also, which is more important, that whoever cooked the poison is testing it now. Right,
and the fact that Turkey welcomes around 35 to 40 million tourists per annum, and tourism is one of their main revenue generating industries, bringing in approximately $34 billion every year. That's huge money, and the choice of this particular incident also, the airport, which is one of the busiest airports in Europe, is that also sending a very strong signal? Because there's a lot of confusion that who is actually responsible for these attacks. On one side, you have the Turkish Prime Minister saying that it is the ISIS. On the other side, there's also the possibility of the insurgents.
Well, actually, speaking, this is the, for the last 1 year, the tourist industry has been declining in Turkey, more than 20% according to last report. But this timing of the summer time at the peak of tourism, and then you find that these things happening, it's a clear indication that yes, the tourist industry is being targeted. B, a civilian targeted to create more death of civilian by attacking an airport. Thirdly, always Erdogan government blame it on the PKK that they have been attacking, so he has a reason to go and attack the PKK in the Syrian border and Syrian territories. But now he is a clear indication that yes, it is a ISIS, because ISIS is now unleashed. They have lost their control on the IS and they are on the run. And IS already already changed the tactic of fighting from a small-scale wars, from a terrorist organization into a more of a terrorist suicidal bombing. So there is now they're on the run in Syria, they're on the run in Iraq.
Right.
So there will be more.
And there are challenges within ISIS also. If we talk about Fallujah, we'll take up that as well. But at this point in time, why has security situation worsened in Turkey, Ambassador Goel? Because as many say, the Turkey is actually embroiled in conflict, in two different areas. First is, of course, inside Turkey, and then the other is across the Syrian border.
Well, let me begin by joining Awad in saying that yes, what happened at the airport today in the morning is very, very unfortunate, highly regrettable. It was absolutely a monstrous and heinous act against innocent human beings. And we have joined in really condemning those activities like we condemn all terrorist activities. I'm not sure whether it is just militancy or extremism. I think it's a combination of all those trends together. Extremism is coming in the way, the radicalism is coming in the way. The problem I see is that if you look at the history of radicalization or extremism in that area over the last 2 or 3 years,
right.
Emergence of groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, etc. has been actively encouraged by various countries, including Turkey, for political achievements, political goals.
Right.
When you actually do this, when you encourage those kind of tendencies, it is difficult to anticipate they will not come back to haunt you. And when you are hunting with the hounds, you are running the risk of being devoured, really. So I think...
So you're saying you're paying for what you have actually nurtured it yourself, and this is actually hitting you back.
I think it is
face.
hitting the back, and it's very unfortunate that it is happening. And the way I see it happening is that if you look at the number of these kind of incidents in Turkey, they're increasing every year. 2015.
How dangerous is the crisis? Because someone who's watching this program would want to know that why actually Turkey is being made a continuous victim of this latest crisis, and is it really between the ISIS and the insurgents, and who is actually really responsible for this?
I think what is happening now really is as the ISIS is on the retreat in Fallujah, as the ISIS is on the retreat in Syria with the bombings and the rebel groups in Syria also coming under attack. I think the ISIS and the other radical elements, the rebels, will have to find a way out. And unfortunately, they have only the way to go back.
Right.
They can't go forward. So ultimately, they begin to haunt where they came from.
How dangerous is the crisis at this point in time, Mr. Awad? Because at this, when we talk about the security worsening in Turkey, the role of the political establishment, and when Erdogan says that, the international coalition is together on this, US has come out in full support of, and the fact that Turkey is also NATO ally, clearly stating that we will continue to fight ISIS. What sort of signaling, what sort of messages are really being sent across?
I think the crisis in Turkey is Erdogan made on crisis. It is a government policy which has been wrongly done toward the neighbors, which he has started his term by saying is zero problem with the neighbors, and we learned that most of the neighbors having problem with Erdogan. One. The second part also, Turkey was compelled to join hand with the United States and NATO in allowing all this terrorist organization activity, insurgency moving into Syria. Because you see, you read all the reports on the YouTube, we have been discussing it, debating it for the last 6 years now, that there have been infiltration, tons of weapons have been shifting. How did all this weapon come? How did this sarin, how this chemical weapon have really reached to the hand of the terrorist organization if you were not sheltering them? I think the Islamist government in Turkey really responsible for the creating of this mess. Turkey is a huge country. It is a small attack, maybe it's seen internationally, it's a huge impact on tourism or in internal affairs of Turkey. But at the long run, I think Turkey still have the strong hand because the army and the security apparatus is quite strong on this. But I think there is a time, it's a high time, it's a wake-up call for the government, it's a wake-up call for the people of Turkey to realize.
How do you see Russia as a factor here?
Russia is a big factor because see, recently we have read the news from Russia that in Caucasus region and in this Chechen and all this Georgian and all these people who came across from the Eastern European countries or the, former USSR countries now have become a shelter for training the moderate, they call them Syrian rebels, inside Georgia and inside Turkish territory. So all these people turning their guns because you cannot control unless and until you have a good collective public opinion management that you can say that we are able to stop this terrorist organization. Look what's happening from Yemen to Syria to Lebanon to Iraq to Libya to Egypt and now Turkey and then Europe. Then that is a clear message that this terror menace has been unleashed. It is high time.
As you rightly pointed out, that we've been discussing the rise of ISIS and its stretch, the way it is actually expanding itself, and also maybe possibly the real debate which is coming in, that if the ISIS is really going slow now in terms of its expansion and the way it is losing key sites like Fallujah earlier. What sort of an impact factor this particular incident will have, and the role of the political establishment, because this is something which, as you were pointing out earlier, the political establishment has nurtured this international coalition, the role of important countries like the US and even Russia for that matter.
I think there is a serious need to now really recalculate and recalibrate the equations in the region. I find that so far basically the political dynamics and the security dynamics has been determined by focus on Syria and Iraq, Libya, Yemen, etc., etc., etc. As a part of those, unstated sometimes is the need to change governments and therefore to do that encourage the rebels. In the process, the retaliatory measures comes in, other forces come in, etc., etc. I think there is a serious need to really recalibrate and recalculate the equations in the region, whether it is necessary to retreat from the policy of encouraging those rebels in the region, whether it is not necessary to step back and allow the security in the region to be re-established again, unless we really are able to give a chance to security through the actors. And Russia has a role, Iran has a role in the region, US has a role, one can't deny it really, unless we are able to look at the stabilizing factors and not encourage either the rebels or the extremist elements or the ISIS, etc., etc., in terms of creating those instability, the chaos. I think we are in for a very, very troublesome period. No, just 1 second, sorry. And in that process, if you also add to what is happening in the European Union, and now Erdogan going to Putin, apologizing to Putin, opening up to Israel, etc., etc., it is opening up a whole Pandora's box.
In fact, that's a very important point, approaching to Israel, also building ties. How do you see this particular, because in the current talk of changing moves towards geostrategic realities, and the way Russia also playing a very, very strong role, for all this talk that as far as the international community is concerned, it's Turkey which is very lonely and vulnerable in its fight because it's fighting two different battles. Do you think this is a valid argument?
I don't know where the battles they are really fighting. I mean, if you create a war to survive in office, that means you are responsible for this mess. Look, Turkey is already in a strong Turkey. In weak Europe, nobody wanted Turkey. I mean, let us look at the wider perspective of it. Europe is now more vulnerable. Turkey is more vulnerable to disintegration. Why? Because you have already infiltrated within the society. You allowed the intelligence, the police, the army to join hand with Al-Nusra, with Al-Qaeda, with IS, supplying them with arms, smuggling the oil of Syria, 200,000 oil barrel per day. For God's sake, everything is seen. And we are not naive anymore. I mean, everything, information is influx, so everybody's account you can see and visit these places. So Turkey is already in a dire situation because Europe is going to disintegrate because of the British, and then many countries falling the same line. So then you will have second is that Erdogan felt himself he is all by himself, isolated. He wanted to approach the Russian, but at the same time he released the pilot of the Russia who killed the Russian pilot, the person. Then he approached Israel, Netanyahu, at the time when he was claiming to be the hero of the support of the Palestinian cause. where everybody knows that Daesh and IS and Islamists and the fever they create because of there is a scapegoat, that there is a Israel in the region which is creating the killing of the Palestinian. That's why everybody rallied behind him, because he's looked at him as the de facto Baghdadi.
So very intelligent geostrategic move also for Turkey now?
It is a strategic for Erdogan. The problem, it is Erdogan mess he has created. It's not the government, it's not the establishment of I think this is the same thing happened in Egypt, where the Morsi have come to power and he was removed by the army. At the similar fashion, I will not be surprised in the coming years that will happen to him, and he will be prosecuted on these issues.
You want to comment on that? Also, you know, one has to really assess what really will be the road ahead from here, because series of attacks, what sort of security apparatus are we really looking at, the role of global players, what's really happening in Turkey at this point?
I really don't know. I cannot be so certain as he is that army could basically then take action and Erdogan could go. The situation is bad. There is no doubt about this thing. But my hope is that like any good shrewd political leader, hopefully he will see the way out of this thing, and he will be able to take measures which can actually reinstitute him back into the political scenario here. But unless he is able to get out of this kind of a policy of dealing with the militants, encouraging the militants, which are going to basically reflect back on the Turkish security situation itself, it's bad. Then I think what he says could very well happen.
All this sort of a nourishment which is being provided to the rebel groups is going to actually hit back in a big way, and it is already hitting the Turkish economy also, and the way many of the important economic lifelines have been hit. But also, if one has to comment on ISIS, because the latest allegation is that ISIS is responsible for this attack. Is the ISIS endgame also approaching after the takeover of Fallujah from of the Iraqi forces?
Well, I think this is for the first time that the Turkish government really clearly and declaring that it is Daesh, it is ISIS. Usually PKK got the blame. It is a clear indication there is an interest among the international community, along the United States and Russia, that it is a time to end IS phenomena from the Middle East, from Syria and Turkey, from Iraq. So there has to be spreading around the world. And now what they are trying to do is actually, if you look at the Turkish government policy, when they have tried to create the crisis of the refugees, they made it them, allocated them in one place, and then opened the border for the rest of the Europe to go. So they wanted to blackmail, and they got what he wanted, because he was looking for a no-fly zone within the Syrian territories, that he can put all this Sunni community inside these territories, and he can divide between that the PKK have no autonomy for the future. That's the Turkish government policy. The second part, which was more important for the government of Turkey, is really to see the crisis coming, that the IS themselves, that they know that it is a monster that should be unleashed, but at the same time they're allowing hundreds of anti-missile aircraft have reached to the Nusra Front, which is Al-Qaeda affiliated organization, but now they are calling it a moderate rebels. So there is no questions of finding a solution. The problem is managing the crisis, and how to manage the crisis is like a chokidar. You need to have a problem. If you don't have a problem, you cannot survive in office, and that's his style. Unless and until if people have to pay the price for the wrongdoing of their government, I think it's the people revolution now.
But for all those who are saying that we are currently witnessing the death throes of ISIS regime, is like simplifying the argument to a great extent.
Well, look in Aleppo, what he's doing in Syria. Northern Aleppo part is really Al-Nusra Front and ISIS. The fighting is on, and you can see the television channels, everybody carrying the story. He's still having the corridor of allowing all these arms to be smuggled in, because Turkey is a NATO ally. It's compelled. It is not by choice. How can you have the best honeymoon relation with the President Assad for 10 years, and suddenly you realize that he is your enemy, and you open a 950 kilometers.
What sort of strategy? Because on one side, as we are saying, that they are fighting two different battles, ISIS, because there's also another debate which says that ISIS is actually losing ground, and this defeat in Fallujah, which comes in the very midst of a very bad year for ISIS. Between January 2015 and mid-March 2016, ISIS has lost about quarter of its remaining territory in Iraq and Syria. The US government estimates that the ISIS recruitment of fighters from abroad has also dropped by at least 75%. But on the contrary, you have the Middle Peace Index, which says that ISIS continues to remain a very big threat for global peace.
Absolutely. You know, when you were talking about the ISIS, whether the end is near or not, I was reminded of the story of Raman. You keep on hitting Raman. I mean, unless you are able to hit where the sustenance is coming from, where the Amrit is, it will keep on coming back really.
Absolutely.
It's a hydra-headed monster. So whether it is ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Al-Nusra, eventually all these organizations, they nurture themselves on the same kind of an ideology. Whether one believes in Sunni Wahhabism or the other believes in Shiaism or whatever it is. The point is that they have been coming out of radicalism. And when any government, any state actor encourages those radicalism, I don't think that we can see the end of the movement. Therefore, I'm not that optimistic. Maybe in the pockets, as ISIS faces the danger or the battle in Fallujah, it will retreat. It will go somewhere else. Just
so
like
as
Al-Qaeda.
long as terror sanctuaries and terror financing is being provided, things are not really going to, this sort of a huge problem is not really going to end. But what's really the road ahead? You know, what should we really expect from the international coalition now after this sort of an attack? Should we just, you know, hope, or the way things are moving from here, there will be new attacks in Turkey, or do you see the political establishment coming out very strongly?
There will be attack everywhere. Unless and until you catch the snake from the head, you cannot kill the snake. The snake has to be caught from the head. If you don't, as Ambassador Sushi was saying, it is the head. It is you need to deal with the people who is supporting, who is sheltering, who is allowing all this arm, who is giving them the ideology. The Salafist, the Takfiri group and the Wahhabism have taken the politics of their own survival on spreading this all over the world. So unless and until you deal, because none of these ideologists, none of these scholars really have come in condemning the ideology of IS. What they are doing, they are condemning the acts, not the ideology, which is a clear indication that among the Muslim scholars, it's a high time we should come out all together and really condemn that this type of religion has nothing to do with Islam. It has the time to fight them. Unless and until we create this kind of a phenomena that we should fight all together our own enemy within the religion, then we are unable to survive in the world, because the world look at us from different angle, and Islamophobia has been spreading because we allowed such kind of minorities to dictate the majority's feeling, and without even the silent majority.
Right. So terror has no religion. It's time to reiterate that again.
Absolutely.
And also final comments from you, Mr. Goel, you know, in terms of what should be really the road ahead for the international coalition from here.
You mentioned international coalition. I don't see any international coalition actually. There are pockets who oppose one or the other, but they sustain, they nurture the other. So I think it is high time that the international community should realize that terrorism never paid, and therefore it has to be an international concerted action against all kinds of terrorism, whatever it is. Any act of killing of innocent has to be stopped. And I think it also justifies that what we have been talking about, the CCIT, and we seem to have completely forgotten about that really.
And where do you see the role of United States? Because United States, after the post-Orlando shooting, which is being actually compared to a 9/11 terror strike, the worst since then, where do you see United States?
I think at the moment they are in the election throes. We have to wait for the elections to be over.
Wait for the elections to happen, and also who takes over as the president, Trump versus Hillary Clinton. And post-Orlando, we saw the way Trump said that, I said it so, that you know how terrorism continues to haunt us, and his whole blatant remarks on Muslim ban and everything which should not be said.
I think the politicians played the dirty game for their own. They don't understand politics really, especially in foreign policy. Foreign policy is dictated for them by those who are their advisor. I don't think Trump or another person really understand the terms of what is Islam, what is Muslim, what is all. As long as his hair is flying in the air, he's happy to see that. So people enjoy himself, enjoy his politics. That is for the United States to choose him or not. But for us, we will keep on paying the blood of our innocent people inside Syria, inside Iraq, inside Lebanon, inside Yemen, or in Turkey, or anywhere in the world, to pay the price for the greedy world where they wanted to see that we should, more innocent should be killed.
But are you hopeful that things will change for good?
If you do not fight terrorism in its own, if you don't, like India said, comprehensive fight against terrorism, which they have given to the United Nations, the draft, which was rejected, it's a high time. Let us address who are the terror, what are the terrorists. Anybody who kill innocent people is a terror. Let us fight it together. Let's
fight it together. Thanks very much, Ambassador Goel and Mr. Awad, for joining us in this program. And it's now time for me to take a short break. Next, when we come back, we'll take on the top story from the economic arena. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. Our next subject is from the economic domain. In a bid to speed up project approvals and cut red tape, the government has increased financial limits of departments and ministries fourfold to 300 crore rupees, while empowering ministers to clear projects of up to 500 crore rupees as against the earlier ceiling of 150 crore rupees. Non-plan expenditure constitutes the biggest portion of the government's spending. A major part of non-plan expenditure is about interest payments, pensions, statutory transfers to states and union territories. So how this will change things in terms of project implementation and ease of doing business? Here's a quick look on this report.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi, accused by his critics of micromanagement and not enough decentralizing of power, has gifted his ministers more financial control. Earlier, ministries dealing with non-planned spending could only sanction projects that cost less than Rs 150 crores. That limit has now been raised to Rs 500 crores. The Finance Minister will remain the final approving authority for projects that cost between Rs 500 crore and Rs 1000 crore. Bigger proposals involving over 1000 crore will need the go-ahead of the Cabinet or the Cabinet Committee for Economic Affairs. For faster clearance, the government has also raised the financial limit of projects that can be approved by officials. A committee on non-plan expenditure, which cleared all proposals worth over Rs 75 crore, will now have the power to assess proposals worth Rs 300 crore and more. The government has also changed its rules to enable quick processing of any rise in project costs. Clearly, the government is focusing on its bigger agenda of speedy delivery and timely implementation. Bureau Report.
Right, and joining me on the program now is Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy from National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us here. And also with me is the Managing Editor of Business Today, Rajiv Dubey. Thanks very much, Rajiv Dubey, for joining us in this program. Let me start the program with you, Mr. Dubey. How important this decision is of, giving greater money power to ministers?
So, if you look at it, of the total expenditure that the government spends on various policies, various programs, 65%, almost 2/3 of the expenditure that the government does is on non-plan expenditure. So, it's very significant. But at the same time, if you look at it, of all the money that the government spends in non-plan expenditure, a majority of that, as you said, goes into interest payments. 5 lakh crore, almost 5 lakh crore of it goes into interest payments. Another 5 lakh crore goes into subsidies and defense expenditure. About 2.5 lakh crore goes into pension payments and grants to states. So if you take that out, because that anyway you will have to cater to, I think the biggest beneficiaries of this will be the smaller ministries. If you look at it, the 300 crore that the secretary and the government and the minister are authorized to clear. There are several ministries which are, let's say, look at art and culture. Its total non-plan expenditure is only 723 crore. Right. Now, if you imagine, the kind of projects that they can clear for 300 crore. Similarly, with the housing and urban development, 959 crore. Similarly with agri and allied services. So
this will be over and above the budget allocation.
Yeah, so they can clear expenditures of this nature up to 300 crore and up to 75 crore. In fact, just the secretary or the minister can clear. Right. So it doesn't even need to go to the minister itself. So it's it's quite significant for smaller ministries, I think. But giving more power and devolution of power is always welcome.
Always welcome devolution of power and also more money power to ministers in terms of not really going through the rigorous process of getting different approvals. Will this really make things easy on ground?
Yeah, I think it would reduce the clearances that some of the small projects need to undergo. Definitely it should help, as Rajiv already pointed out, it should help the small ministries. But then my problem is not about the small ministries. There are bigger ministries, and if you have a same kind of cap, and I am not really sure that the bigger projects which have been cleared, and they have to wait for longer time than that they were doing before also. So small projects, small things can be cleared by the ministry. But more important problem is we have to wait and see what happens after March 31st, 2017, where we will not be having any kind of a differentiation between plan and non-plan expenditure. That time, I mean, we already have this 500 crore for the plan expenditure. So now we are allowing for 500 crore in the non-plan expenditure. Will that become 1,000 crore after March 31st?
For the benefit of our viewers, Professor, if I can just ask you, how this will really ease out things with no factor to distinguish between plan and non-plan?
Well, I think that distinction at the state level, see, there are a lot of issues between the center and state, so the definition of plan and non-plan used to create a lot of confusion between when there is a devolution from the center to state. There is a limit on the the grant, I mean, where when we can say that it's a plan expenditure, above that it's a non-plan expenditure. Those kind of, a lot of ambiguity used to be there. So that now that we are living it out, we are moving away from this kind of distinction, this kind of confusion. Frankly, nobody knows what is plan, non-plan at the moment. So, a lot of confusion at the state level particularly. So, when it comes to once we are removing this plan, non-plan distinction, will it be still 500 crore or is it going to be 1,000 crore? That we are not really sure. It's only 5-6 months to go now.
Will that be very difficult because 31st March is few months to go from here?
Yeah, so I think that's in the realm of unknown right now, but definitely there's going to be a change, and whether that change, and definitely that change is going to be for a higher allocation, I guess. But I guess right now only the government knows what it's discussing, but for sure whatever they do after 17 fiscal, I think it's it is going to be less of a confusion, and perhaps more aligned policies between the state and the center, better utilization of funds in that sense. So I think it should
if we really have to increase
more importantly, this yesterday's decision will improve the efficiency of the fund flow mechanism from center to states as well as states to lower level, third tier. I think currently we have a lot of hurdles in the fund flow mechanism. Now, if you look at plan expenditure, you don't see that kind of hurdles. Like for example, MGNREGS, there is no problem in terms of the fund flow. But here in the non-plan expenditure, the fund flow mechanism has a lot of restrictions. I think this decision might, to some extent, reduce those kind of constraints.
In the spirit also of the Finance Commission recommendations, which increase the allocation for the state governments and for in a way also boosting cooperative federalism model of the Prime Minister?
I think that's far-fetched conclusion from yesterday's decision. So I think that devolution is completely independent of what the ministries are going to do in terms of non-plan expenditure.
Also, if one really has to increase, if we just try to increase the ambit of the discussion, seeing the spirit of the government, which is focusing more on governance, speedy delivery or on projects, will this sort of a decision really help in, making things easier on ground?
It definitely will. But see, like I said, a devolution of financial authority, devolution of any authority of any kind, is good for responsible ministers. But there again, you have to draw the line between responsible ministers and irresponsible ministers, and there have been many in the past. So as long as we can assure, the government is sure that the money that it is spending is actually spent on those and doesn't get into a black hole. I think any devolution of authority, especially financial authority, which actually eases increases the pace of work, is very good. But we have to watch out. But I think the one good thing that the government has done is that anything above between 300 to 500 crore is also not in just the minister's hand. It goes to the committee on non-plan expenditure, which includes the expenditure secretary, which includes the secretary of that ministry, as well as the Niti Aayog CEO. So I think there is some control over there, and anything above that, of course, goes to the finance ministry, where, of course,
so you need some serious fine balancing also. On one side, we are saying that it will actually enhance speedy approval on bigger projects, but on the other side, also serious checks and balances are needed when you're talking about this money.
No, that's a fundamental issue in the overall project appraisal. Whether it's a 500 crore project or it's a 1,000 crore project, I think the project appraisal mechanism, somebody should be doing it. Either it's a financial advisor within the department or somewhere in the finance ministry. Until unless we are not clear about that.
Right.
So this suspicion will remain.
Right.
But more importantly, Natasha, I think the biggest positive from the yesterday's thing is there are a lot of projects which are stuck because of the cost escalation. Okay.
Right.
And that they have given some kind of freedom. When if it increases by 20% or something like that, the committee of secretaries can clear it.
Up to
so I think
so
that is a major issue for us. I mean, there are a lot of projects which are pending,
right,
and which has been stuck because of the cost escalation. So this decision of yesterday's might really speeden.
Okay.
Sanctioning that whatever the extra
and
grant
after
that
2 years of elevated spending on infrastructure and also like roads and railways, this sort of a challenge, because cost escalation is a very, very important matter. We have seen project delays and cost overruns.
In fact, one of the things, if you look at yesterday's financial stability report,
it categorically said
infrastructure project spending is the biggest component of the NPAs.
Most of the NPAs actually are because from the infrastructure
and
sector.
That's largely because of the cost escalation.
Largely because of cost escalation.
So yeah, so there's a cap of about 75 crore on that 20%, but it's a very, very significant decision, because for a project of about let's say 300 crore to 500 crore, 10 to 15% cost escalation is very normal. For any delay of this nature. So if that can be cleared by the ministry itself, it speeds up the process. But I think another interesting thing, as he was mentioning, was that that there is that the government has very clearly told the ministries that while you are spending this money, I don't know if you noticed, Bhanu, that when you're clearing this project amount, make sure that this money is not spent on land acquisition and on buildings, and so I think that is a very interesting observation, because a lot of money actually of this nature gets stuck in those kind of investments. So it's essentially meant for development projects, where if you're building a, let's say a water project or a irrigation project, there might be a small building or something, but don't spend this kind of money on acquiring land and in building 10-story buildings and stuff like that.
So focus primarily on development, and that is largely the bigger agenda of the government.
I think that's slightly problematic. If you don't have land, where is the project you are going to implement?
Right.
Now, if you are going to allow the state government to get in acquiring the land, I think that's going to take a lot more years. And that's exactly a problem with most of the infrastructure projects. It's been sanctioned, but you don't have land.
Right.
So I think my view is that I think we need to really relook at the whole project appraisal mechanism itself. And I think large part of the projects are stuck because of
and that also asks for greater convergence of ministries, because all the ministries are actually moving in different directions. Even when we talk about land acquisition, there are challenges from the environment ministry, and then of course forest clearances also. So that's where the convergence of ministries also is important.
We are very glad that the Prime Minister is chairing that the group of ministries which is looking at the infrastructure. He is taking up each and every project personally.
Right.
I think that way it's giving a very positive note for us, that many of the pending projects can.
What sort of economic model are we really looking at? Because when we say devolution of funds, talk about cooperative federalism, greater role of state governments, what sort of economic model are we really looking at?
Ultimately, growth has to come from the states. There are a lot of subjects which are under the states, right? And most of the projects, if you look at the manufacturing sector, why some states are doing better than other states? That's largely because of the land is a major input for many of the manufacturing activities. If some states could manage to mobilize land and provide land to the private sector or to the public sector for that matter, then we see that the growth is happening.
Right.
So I think, yes, cooperative federalism is one philosophical concept, but I think still the state governments have to play a very, very major role. But instead of, if you don't do that, you only see that full page advertisements everywhere. You don't have a place to spend.
But we are living in the times of political economy, where political factors equally play a very, very, very strong role. And no matter how hard you talk about cooperative federalism, there are also political reasons. Just few months away from the big assembly state elections. Also, so in terms of economic model, because
I'll only mention one with regard to this, because in some ways it's also a natural progression of the way the economy is and the way the, what it costs to build projects like these. If you look at it, at inflation and all those keeping into account, 500 crore, 300 crore is not a very big sum. It is a big amount for small projects, but it's not a very big sum in that sense. But if you look at the MP lad scheme, for instance, when it was started in 92, 93 or 94, it was 5 lakh per MP per year.
Right.
Today it's 5 crore per MP per year. So, it's over a period of time, these, limits also have to be increased to make sure that, something gets done for that kind of money.
Right.
But we are not sure when is this 150 crore has come in.
Okay. Yes. Right. But in terms of when I'm talking about the economic model and even the infrastructure sector, because just the financial stability report, and as you rightly pointed out, the NPAs will continue to haunt us, and it might actually go up to another 9.3% by March. Now that's a huge figure.
And Morgan Stanley is predicting 8.5%.
Morgan Stanley is predicting 8.5. You're talking about our growth figures. Then of course there's also a challenge. 7th Pay Commission report is how the recommendations are accepted. This will hit the government's purse strings also. So what sort of fiscal space are we really looking at?
Well, I mean, they have already declared that they are going to stick to 3.5%. Maybe if they can violate 0.12%, this side, that side, I mean, there's nothing big deal about it.
Right.
And the 7th Pay Commission already been, as Finance Minister already cleared it, he said that the 7th Pay Commission already been absorbed in most of the line ministries. So in that sense, we are not going to see a jump in the budget figures.
Okay.
But more importantly, it all depends on how the growth is going to turn around, because the revenues depends heavily on that. And also a lot of bets on the disinvestment as well as this
spectrum sale.
Is the private investment really picking up now?
No,
not really.
I mean, yesterday's report very clearly says private investment at the lowest.
Right.
I think, I mean, as I have been talking about this in all these forums, I mean, there is no other way for India to revive the growth except by increasing the public investment,
right,
even at the cost of violating the.
And when we talk about infrastructure sector, all the investment is actually happening from the public investment, and private investors.
So you see, all the increase in stock prices of cement and steel companies has to do with that. The fact that, but like like he's saying, there is no greenfield investment happening. There are companies acquiring another company. That doesn't add to the economic value of an asset. Economic value gets added only when you're setting up new projects. So no new cement plant is coming, no new steel plant is coming. But for sure, at least there is some movement on some front. And I think the finance commission, the pay commission recommendations will add some value to the consumption.
Right, but when we talk about
durables,
when we talk about greater financial control to ministers through this particular measure, what sort of ecosystem is actually required so that the work is actually enhanced and facilitated in important sectors? What sort of ecosystem?
I think the trick lies in execution. You know, in the past we've confused allocation with execution.
Right.
Allocation doesn't lead to execution. Execution has to be done at a very micro level. It has to be followed through till the very last moment. You know, I was giving you the example of MP lad scheme. Now the MP lad scheme says very specifically MP sanctions it, but it actually has to be executed by the district authorities.
Right.
Now if the MP or the district authorities do not follow it through that project, then that project never gets done.
Right.
So the execution is the key to.
And the fact district is actually the focus when we talk about implementation.
The tracking
of most
system
of the
is
schemes.
also very important. I think we need to learn lessons from Ministry of Rural Development. The kind of tracking system that they have on that rural development programs, they know what's happening 1 hour back, what's happening in one of the states, in any of the rural development programs. They can track it sitting in from Delhi. So I think the project management system is something that needs to be adopted at all the ministry level.
Right.
And maybe Niti Aayog can play a major role here, and we have been seeing that lot of action happening from the Niti Aayog. I think even Niti Aayog should also step in to see how the projects are implemented, what are the stages.
Okay, so focus should be more on outcomes than just on outlays and allocations, but simultaneously also incentivizing governments if they are performing in terms of reaching their targets and improving on their on outcome measures.
Yeah, I mean that's already inbuilt. I think it's already been inbuilt in many of the, I think, finance
even for state
also.
governments.
Yeah, so they have been inbuilt. I mean, incentive as structure is already there.
Right.
It's only that you have to perform.
You have to perform, but greater decentralization and devolution
Yes.
of funds. But you know, one has to really assess the Indian economic situation at this point of time. We have seen regular comments really coming in, and now also the latest financial stability report, and with ministers, 500 crore, as you rightly pointed out earlier, is not really going to have a very much impact. But of course, for smaller ministries, it is going to have an impact. Vis-a-vis global economic situation, how strongly are we anchored?
So I think, you know, if you look at the global economic scenario, if it was to whatever extent it had to impact India, it has already impacted India between 2008 and 2016.
Right.
And the fact that we are still growing and continue to grow at perhaps one of the fastest rates in the world is testimony to our economic abilities and our ability to grow as a nation, our ability to progress economically as a nation. So I think the impact, I don't think it's going to be any worse than what it has already been.
Okay.
And that we have been able to weather this storm all this while and are still growing is because of our own capabilities and our own internal abilities.
Okay.
Though there's a lot to be done.
There's a lot to be done. We are firmly anchored, even if the global economic situation is not really going in the positive direction.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just support what Rajiv has said. I mean, I think right now India's outlook is much better than many of the emerging market economies. In fact, this year the growth cannot be less than 8%,
Right.
as far as my forecast goes. But then, having said that, I think it's very important for us to take the yesterday's report very seriously. I've been talking about this NPA for almost 3 years in this Lok Sabha channel. I think the NPAs is going to be a major issue. I mean, at least 6 months down the line. So if we don't really address this particular issue, I think we are going to see a very significant fall in the public.
But do you see a change in approach in terms of sort of banking reforms we've been
Yes,
talking
RBI has
about?
done its bit.
Right.
I mean, RBI has done its bit. So now it's only that some recovery in the economy that can help banks to recover some of the NPAs.
Right.
That can happen only by increasing public investments. There is no other option.
Right.
I hope the Finance Ministry sees it as an opportunity. And even at the violation of fiscal deficit of 3.5%, the government should go for investment. Of course, 7th Pay Commission might help to some
extent.
extent.
So public investment must be encouraged, but simultaneously, let's also hope that external commodity prices don't really go up, because they're actually given a big opportunity, a window opportunity to the government.
But then the external demand is going to be much more subdued because of the recent developments in the international market.
Recent developments in the international market. But what really will be the big challenges for the Indian economy in months to come?
I think growth. NPAs from the banking sector point of view, growth is a huge challenge, and I think this is exactly what the government is trying to do with the Pay Commission recommendations. Infuse some 60,000-70,000 crore after taxes into the economy and see how much it can improve the sales of increased demand, consumer durables, automobiles and things like that, FMCG products and things like that. And of course, expenditure infrastructure on infrastructure, which is again already seeing some growth in terms of like I said, cement and steel companies, and there are 27 ancillary industries which are related to infrastructure, which benefit from something like this. So I think these are the things that the government
and focus again also shifting on rural economy, how to boost rural consumption. That is also high on agenda.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the budget has highlighted. I mean, let's realize that the rural demand will be a biggest booster for India's domestic manufacturing. And whatever result that we have seen yesterday, I mean, at least in this MGNREGS, they have already pumped in 50%, more than 50% of what they allocated. And if all these things, if it can help in reviving rural demand, then I think we should expect manufacturing to recover. Right.
So the important task is how far can we really sustain the growth momentum, and that is something which we really have to see. Thanks very much, Professor Bhanumurthy and Dubey, for joining us in this program. And that's all we have for you in this edition of Inside. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.